Welcome to the third installment in the series Charlie Kirk and Adventism. Now, every presentation in this series is not going to directly speak about Charlie Kirk. Every presentation in the series is not going to involve really getting into the specifics of Charlie Kirk and how Adventists have looked upon his legacy and various interactions concerning the assassination and the life and the legacy of Charlie Kirk. Every single one of the presentations of this series is not going to get into that specifically. But why is this important? Because Charlie Kirk and Adventism is a microcosm. It's a microcosm. It's a situation that encapsulates in miniature the characteristic qualities and features of something much larger, which is really Adventism and politics and prophecy. The fact that Adventists have different views when it comes to politics and even when it comes to how they understand prophecy to unfold. The be-all and end-all of this series is not simply Charlie Kirk and Adventism and that issue specifically, but it's dealing with something much larger. How are Adventists to interact with the world around them? How is our prophetic understanding and our doctrinal belief going to inform how we see things in the world around us? And so when something like this happens, Adventists respond one way or another because of these different views that are within the church. And as I've said and pointed out in the previous presentation, having different views doesn't necessarily mean we have to divide from one another. We can still have these different views, but not communicate or interact with each other the way the world does. Okay? What we see in the world at large, the world outside of Adventism, we see a lot of hostility. We don't want to display the character of Satan when we're interacting with people who have views different from ourselves. We want to display the character of Christ. And so the differences and the variation of opinions within Adventism have really, in a sense, just come to the surface once again concerning the issue of Charlie Kirk. So let's take a look now and just do some groundwork once again. Again, I'm not going into the specifics of Charlie Kirk himself in this presentation. And there will be other presentations where I won't as well. But like I said, the situation of Charlie Kirk and Adventism is a microcosm in that it does what? It really illustrates something much larger. So here we are in part 3. Now let's just look at just a basic definition of politics provided here by Oxford Languages. The activities associated with governance. The activities associated with the governance of a country or other area, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power. I just want to focus on the first part of this definition, the first section there, the activities associated with the governance of a country or other area. And so when you're dealing with the activities associated with governance, you're dealing with politics. When you're dealing with the activities associated with governance. Now, government, again, just very basic here. This definition provided says, the body of persons that constitutes the governing authority of a political unit or organization. And so my simple definition is it's referring to those who govern. Now, of course, we could think of that word in other ways and use it in other ways. One of the other ways we could think about it is to describe the kind of government, the type of government, the system, the type of system. You could have a communistic government. You could have a monarchical government. You could have a Republican form of government. You could have different forms of government. And so government, the word government could be used to describe that as well. And so some simple ways. But I really want to get down to just the basics here. And so that's why I'm emphasizing this very simple way of understanding what government is. It's just referring to those who govern. And so you have government in the church. You have church government. You have government within a corporation or business. There are those who are in charge. There are those who enforce the policies and make sure that those policies are being enforced. In society, there is government. There are rules to be followed. There are laws, and there are those that enforce those laws and rules. If you have laws that are being enforced, you're going to have government. If you have laws, if you have a society, if you have a bunch of people who come together in community, they have to agree to certain rules and regulations that they're all going to abide by. So there have to be laws. Otherwise, you just have chaos. You have to have order. You know, even when you think about traffic lights and traffic laws, those laws themselves are based on a moral position. You might think that they're based on the value of life or the value of safety. So you have laws that are in place and that are being enforced in different ways. And so you have government if you have laws that are being enforced. So one way or another, people are political. They're interacting politically because they're relational. And if you're part of society and you're agreeing to be part of society and you're agreeing to pay your taxes and abide by the laws and rules in society, you are engaging in politics in a very general sense. Now, if somebody says, I don't want to engage in politics and I'm going to go off in the woods on my own and live on my own, well, they can go and do that if they want to try and do that and live their own way and go live somewhere in the woods. But if a group of people say, we want to go off and live on our own and we don't want to be part of society, that group of people are going to develop their own form of government. And if they're going to interact with one another, if they're not going to be at war with one another, if there isn't going to be chaos among them, if they're going to have a relationship with one another, then there is going to be a form of government. So there is going to be a political system there in that small group. So government, in that sense, is inevitable. And politics, in that sense, is inevitable as well. Even in the new heaven and the new earth, there's going to be the government, the perfect government of God. God is in charge. And so God will always be in charge. And so in the new heaven and the new earth, there is the government of God, the perfect government of God, ruling forever and ever. We look forward to that in the new heaven and the new earth when sin is destroyed. Let's go back and, again, doing some groundwork, looking at Adventist history here. Here is portions of an article that I got off the White Estate by Paul Gordon, and it is called The Right to Vote, Shall We Exercise It? And here we read, the third annual session of the General Conference, which convened at Battle Creek on May 17, 1865, was destined to be historic in regard to the question of voting. Delegates included prominent Adventist leaders such as J.N. Andrews, Uriah Smith, Emmy Cornell, J.N. Loughborough, J.H. Wagner, Joseph Bates, and I.D. Van Horn. James and Ellen White were there also, and both of them spoke to the assembled delegates. The report of this session states that J.N. Andrews spoke at one meeting to a crowd of more than 600 people, and that this is probably the largest body of Sabbath keepers that has assembled for 1,500 years. An important item of business at the session was the choice of officers. James White was elected president of the General Conference, Uriah Smith secretary, and I.D. Van Horn treasurer. Some significant resolutions were adopted. One expressed sorrow for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Another reaffirmed non-combatancy in war, with an acknowledgement of responsibility to government in tribute, custom, honor, and reverence to the civil power, as enjoined in the New Testament. A third involved the subject of voting. Remembering that James and Ellen White were present and actively participated in the work of the conference, we note this resolution. Resolved, that in our judgment, the act of voting, when exercised in behalf of justice, humanity, and right, is in itself blameless and may be at some times highly proper, but that the casting of any vote that shall strengthen the cause of such crimes as intemperance, insurrection, and slavery, we regard as highly criminal in the sight of heaven, but we would deprecate any participation in the spirit of party strife. This basic resolution, along with supporting counsels from the pen of Ellen White, has continued to be a guide for the Church for more than 100 years. Note the clear distinction that is made between the exercise of the voting right and participation in the spirit of party strife. Note also that several social issues are mentioned that should be a point of concern. This resolution was reaffirmed as the position of our church the next year. It has not been changed to this day. And so, we look at this resolution, and we look at these issues that are being mentioned here, but that the casting of any vote that shall strengthen the cause of such crimes as intemperance, insurrection, and slavery we regard as highly criminal in the sight of heaven. Okay, so here we have the idea that it may be at sometimes highly proper, the act of voting, when exercised in behalf of justice, humanity, and right. Some people are going to look at Charlie Kirk and Adventism and say that he stood for justice, humanity, and right. They're going to look at that and they're going to see that. Others are going to say, no, that's not correct. And that's why I say the issue of Charlie Kirk and Adventism is a microcosm in that it encapsulates the characteristic qualities or features of something bigger, much bigger. That bigger reality that has been around a lot longer than this situation of Charlie Kirk and Adventism is how do Adventists interact with politics and different points of view within politics. There are clearly divisions within Adventism when it comes to political issues, but those divisions shouldn't become divisive. Okay, we could have differences of opinion, but we should have the unity of the Holy Spirit. But these various ideas within Adventism that are being supported by influential people and that are being embraced by people on all levels of the church, these different ideas when it comes to politics, it really just came to the surface when it comes to the situation of the assassination of Charlie Kirk and responses to that. It just came to the surface, but it's been there all along. Okay, so there we see. Let's take a look at this article a little further. I'm not going to read the whole article. So I'll put a link to this. I'll put a link to this below in the description, as I've been doing with these videos. And there you have Paul Gordon. Reprinted from Adventist Review, September 18 and 25, 1980. Paul A. Gordon served as Undersecretary of the Ellen G. White Estate. And so this is the article. Now, it's in two parts. Also in the article we read, writing from Australia in 1898, Ellen White emphasized the same points. We are not as a people to become mixed up with political questions. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers in political strife, nor bind with them in their attachments. Keep your voting to yourself. Do not feel it your duty to urge everyone to do as you do. So this is another important principle. Keep your voting to yourself. Now, obviously, when we deal with political questions and we deal with political strife, we're dealing with the negative side of politics, getting mixed up in political questions, okay? Because in one sense, the questions that we're dealing with, if the government is going to be involved with them, the issues that we may be dealing with, whatever that issue is. For example, Ellen White had very strong views when it came to the temperance question, when it came to prohibition. She obviously supported the temperance movement. She obviously supported that. And so obviously that issue is going to involve politics and political questions. But to not get mixed up and to not engage in political strife, okay, and to be very careful about taking upon yourself an allegiance to a certain party. We have to be careful about that. We have to be very careful about the strife and the negative side of politics. When we read a quote like this, we've got to keep the context in mind. Avoiding party strife. Avoiding, okay, we have a political issue at hand, but how do we deal with that political issue? How do we deal with it? And how do we deal with members in the church who may disagree with us on that issue? That's the thing. We don't want to deal with it the way it is often dealt with in the political world outside of the Adventist church. Have to be very careful about that. Here we continue. In summary, we quote a portion of an editorial appearing in the Review and Herald of September 13th, 1928. Elder F.M. Wilcox, longtime church leader and editor, wrote, "The Seventh-day Adventist Church does not seek to dictate to its members as to how they shall vote or whether or not they shall vote at all. It is left for each one to act on his own judgment in the fear of God. We have been told by the servant of the Lord that we should not link up with political parties, that we should not agitate political questions in our schools or institutions. On the other hand, we have been instructed by the same authority that when certain moral issues such as prohibition are involved, the advocates of temperance fail to do their whole duty unless they exert their influence by precept and example, by voice and pen, and vote in favor of total abstinence. This instruction is not mandatory. It is still left for each one to determine for himself what he shall do. While an individual member of the church has a right, if he so likes, to cast his vote, the church, as such, should hold itself entirely aloof from politics. It is one thing for the individual members of the church to vote, and another thing for these same individuals in their church capacities to endeavor to influence political measures." So let's continue and look again at continuing in the article. Okay, here we have just 1 month before the death of James White. Seventh-day Adventists were gathered for camp meeting in Des Moines, Iowa. A proposed action was placed before the delegates which read, "Resolved, that we express our deep interest in the temperance movement now going forward in this state, and that we instruct all our ministers to use their influence among our churches and with the people at large to induce them to put forth every consistent effort by personal labor and at the ballot box in favor of the prohibitory amendment of the Constitution which the Friends of Temperance are seeking to secure." And this is from Review and Herald, July 5th, 1881. Some disagreed with the clause that called for action at the ballot box and urged that it should be taken out. Ellen White, who was attending this camp meeting, had retired for the night, but she was called to give her counsel. Writing of it, at the time, she said, "I dressed and I found I was to speak to the point of whether our people should vote for prohibition. I told them yes, and spoke 20 minutes. And this is from Temperance 255. Now somebody say, wait a second, this sounds like a contradiction to what F.M. Wilcox later wrote. Because over here we see that F.M. Wilcox wrote, "It is left for each one to act on his own judgment in the fear of God. We have been told by the servant of the Lord that we should not link up with political parties, that we should not agitate political questions in our schools or institutions, that we should not agitate political questions in our schools and institutions." And then he wrote, "While an individual member of the church has a right, if he so likes, to cast his vote, the church as such should hold itself entirely aloof from politics. It is one thing for the individual members of the church to vote, and another thing for these same individuals in their church capacities to endeavor to influence political measures." And yet at the same time, when we read this, somebody might say, well, this sounds like a contradiction. This sounds like a contradiction. It says here, all our ministers are to use their influence among our churches and with the people at large to induce them to put forth every consistent effort by personal labor and at the ballot box in favor of the prohibitory amendment of the Constitution. So this is dealing with the federal Constitution. So, very interesting, we're seeing this. Is there a contradiction here? Continuing. Ellen White never changed that position. In an article written for the Review just a year before her death, she re-emphasized the responsibility of every citizen to exercise every influence within his power, including his vote, to work for temperance and virtue. While we are in no wise to become involved in political questions, yet it is our privilege to take our stand decidedly on all questions relating to temperance reform. There is a cause for the moral paralysis upon society. Our laws sustain an evil which is sapping their very foundations. Many deplore the wrongs which they know exist, but consider themselves free of all responsibility in the matter. This cannot be. Every individual exerts an influence in society. In our favored land, every voter has some voice in determining what laws shall control the nation. Should not that influence and that vote be cast on the side of temperance and virtue? And this is from Review and Herald, October 15th, 1914. So, again, we're seeing it here that Ellen White is very clearly taking a position, and there is a moral basis for it. There is a cause for the moral paralysis upon society. So a person might say, you can't legislate morality. Well, it's true that you can't make someone moral, but every law is based on a moral position. And so clearly she saw the dangers of alcohol on society. She saw those dangers. And so she says there is a cause for the moral paralysis upon society. And so her biblical worldview that informed her morality caused her to take a stand, a very strong stand, when it came to this issue. And since we are to vote for justice and we are to vote for virtue, and we are called to do that, we can plainly see that Ellen White makes a strong stand when it comes to this issue of temperance. Now, a person might say, well, this sounds contrary to what we were reading earlier. Is there a contradiction here? How is it that we are in no wise to become involved in political questions, and yet it is our privilege to take our stand decidedly on all questions relating to temperance reform? And like I said, in a general sense, we could say, well, this is something that involves politics. And yet we're no way to be involved in political questions. Again, she's speaking really about the party strife and the kind of interactions that would take place among those in the world at large when it comes to issues. Because when engaging with issues, there is that dirty side of politics where people on opposite ends of the political spectrum can engage in these things and end up arguing and end up in strife and so forth. And so we're to avoid that. And yet at the same time, she says, in our favored land. So this is talking about America at large. It's not simply a state issue that she's thinking about here. She says every voter has some voice in determining what laws shall control the nation. Okay? And should not that influence and that vote be cast on the side of temperance and virtue? So we are to take a moral stand, and we are to make a stand and stand up for justice and vote for moral issues and to take the right stand morally, and that's what she's doing. Now, in the article, there are three conclusions that Paul Gordon points out here. Number one, we are always to vote on the side of temperance and virtue. Always to vote on the side of temperance and virtue. Number two, the decision to vote for candidates is a personal decision. If you vote, keep your voting to yourself. Do not feel it your duty to urge everyone to do as you do. And then it says, we are to stand free from political strife and corruption. We have to avoid the strife and the argument. We take a position for what's right prayerfully. We make our decision, we vote, but we avoid the strife. Now, within Adventism, the world has basically moved on since the days of Prohibition, Well, the country has moved on, and we know from prophecy the country is going to continue to move on, and it's going to move on in the wrong direction. So in today's world, somebody might say, well, why aren't we taking this strong stand and to outlaw alcohol now and to, once again lift up the temperance movement? Why aren't we doing that now? Now, our position as a church hasn't changed. We have pretty much said alcohol is bad for you, it's bad for society, avoid it, and it is very clear that our position hasn't changed. But the church has taken a different direction in dealing with it, because when it comes to that issue, the country has moved on, and we're dealing with other political issues now, issues like abortion, issues like same-sex marriage and the LGBTQ political agenda. We've got other issues now. We understand that the country is going to continue to move in the wrong direction ultimately. Ultimately, it's going to go in the wrong direction and until the constitutional principles are repudiated. We understand that. And so though the Adventist Church has not changed its position when it comes to the issue of alcohol and tobacco use and these types of things, although we don't see what was going on in the days of Ellen White when it comes to the approach and the methodology, that there was that opportunity at that time, and the country was different. The landscape was different at that time. This country has gone more and more in division. The country has gotten more and more divided. And the unity that the Adventist movement had at that time when it came to that issue was very strong. And obviously there was the prophetess Ellen White who was there to guide that. And so they took a strong stand, even though there were some who were cautious about voting. And there were some who were concerned with that. They took a strong stand because there was unity on that issue. And so when it comes to these various moral issues, what I'm saying is that even though in the church there are different positions, even though in the church there are different points of view when it comes to political issues, it doesn't mean that there isn't a right stance and a wrong stance. And so in Ellen White's day, she illustrated the right stance when it came to the issue of prohibition, and she took that stand based on her biblical morality. And so the position wasn't taken then by Ellen White and those who stood up for that. The position wasn't taken then to say, well, God gives people choice and he's given them the ability to choose. And so let's just stay out of this issue. Let people do what they want, or even vote in favor of alcohol and the legalization of alcohol. No, the position was this is dangerous and immoral for society, and we should vote for temperance men who are obviously involved with politics. Okay? When you vote in the general sense, generally speaking, especially in our day, when you vote for an issue, when you take a position on an issue, you're voting for a person. And that person is involved, most likely, with a political party. And so the issue that you take, or rather the stand that you take on a certain issue, is going to involve one political party or another political party, as whoever it is that you're voting for who aligns with your stand is going to be in one party or another. And so the principle applies. We are to take a stand, but we are to avoid the strife and the arguments and getting mixed up and tangled up in these political questions. We are to have a clear view and an understanding. However, within Adventism church, within the Seventh-day Adventist church, there is a reflection of what is going on in the world. The divisions are becoming greater and greater. The divisions are becoming greater and greater. And so, the unity that we could see in Ellen White's day when it came to the issue of temperance is much more difficult in today's world because the country is growing more and more divided. And sadly, when it comes to the church, there are greater divisions when it comes to what stand and what position to take politically. And so I think the general principles of keeping your voting to yourself, of standing up and voting for temperance and virtue, of taking a moral stand when it comes to political issues, we're all called to do that. And we're all called to do it prayerfully. But we have to keep in mind that people are going to have different points of view on what that should look like. But however we do it, we should speak the truth in love and avoid getting tangled up and mixed up in political strife and dealing with each other in the way the world does. And so that's my presentation for today. You can look at the article, get into it a little more, and I hope this was a blessing to you.